Hello students, welcome to the class on educational psychology. And today I'll be talking on intelligence. I have some objectives in mind. One, understanding nature of intelligence with reference to individual differences. Two, understanding meaning of the concept of intelligence with reference to the expert views in psychology. Then understanding the role of heredity and environment as determinants of intelligence. Then the last one, to be familiar with the educational use of concept of intelligence. Now let us see how we can have a detailed account. First, to begin with nature. It is really not an easy task to define intelligence in exact terms. The reason being the absence of physical correlate where we could place this concept safely. In fact, in early 19th century, most of the thinkers that thought difference in human abilities or intelligence could be attributed to some identifiable physical properties. To begin with brain. And here they surveyed the structural composition of brain. The measured bumps on the head were searched in relation to greater and smaller amounts of ability possessed by an individual. This science was called phrenology, which enjoyed enormous acceptability for quite some time in the historical advancement of intelligence concept. Although this belief has lost its impetus, yet the contemporary cognitive psychology information processing ability has skillfully spotlighted brain as the center of multiple processes, that is abilities. In their efforts to understand the nature of intelligence, the psychologists have come to use three models of our approach. One, biogenic, second, psychogenic, and third, operational. Let us start with biogenic. Biogenic view is rather rooted in the idea that human beings or animals must survive facing continuous challenges from the environment. The organisms are equipped to deal with the environment by using abilities necessary for their survival on Earth. Incidentally, Francis Galton, the younger cousin of evolutionist biologist Charles Darwin, attempted to relate human organism or its capabilities or capacities to the survival process. He equated intelligence with sensory equipment and also developed a testing program to measure the powers of mind. He believed and also collected some important empirical data to show that intelligence travels through blood and had an adaptive value. Some well-known figures in the field also suggest an adaptive or survival value of intelligence. One is Alfred Binet, having the honor of constitution of the Binet scales of intelligence, believes, quote, intelligence is the judgment called good sense, practical sense, initiative, the faculty of adapting oneself to the circumstances, or being autocritique, closed. Then Freeman too believes in the adaptive or adjustive use of intelligence. He emphasizes the adjustment ability of an individual to his environment. Then we have Sir Cyril Burt. He opines that the intelligence is the power of readjustment to a relatively new situation. Then we have J.R. Sternberg, who thinks of intelligence as the abilities to adapt oneself to the vagaries of a challenging and uncertain real world and the environment. A consensus on the definition arrived at by the American Psychological Association in the year 1995 speaks of intelligence in these terms. Quote, individuals differ from one another in their ability and understand complex ideas to adapt effectively to the environment. Quote closed. A critical examination of the biogenic model does not allow the adaptive explanation of intelligence to be accepted as a rule. There are some serious weaknesses, like it doesn't hold true with all individuals. It has been found that the people with average or even below average intelligence do well with their environmental challenges. On the contrary, individuals with exceptionally high intelligence fail to adapt well to their environment. Examples are those of Voltaire, Victor Hugo, O. Henry, Freud, Pascal, Kafka, Mirza Ghalib, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, and Rumi. Now we come to psychogenic model. The psychogenic model emphasizes the principle of individual differences. Although these individual differences can be substantial, they are never essentially or entirely consistent. A given person and his intellectual performance will vary on different occasions, in different domains, and as judged by different criteria. Although considerable clarity has been achieved in some areas, no such conceptualization has yet answered all the important questions, and none commands universal assent. A true reflection of this psychogenic model came from the mainstream science on intelligence, and which was actually signed by 52 intelligence researchers in 1994. They looked at intelligence as, quote, a very general mental capability that, among other things, involves the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, and learn from experience, quote closed. The basic assumption under this approach is that intelligence is mainly an innate ability. To accept this idea, one has to face a dilemma, that is, the innateness of the concept of, on one hand, and the scores obtained by an individual on the other. An intelligence test which are exposed to environmental influences, under such a condition, how long does intelligence remain as innate property of an individual? And that is the dilemma. R.B. Cattell, an authority in the field, has resolved this quandary by suggesting two types of intelligence. Type A is taken as the genetic potentiality or the basic innate qualities of the individual's nervous system, and the type B as the crystallized intelligence resulting from one's personal experience, learning, and other environmental or fluid influences. But we must take a precaution that the two types of intelligence are mutually interactive and overlapping. That is why we can't assess innateness of intelligence directly or unaffected by the environmental factors. We may add a few more definitions, primarily of this nature. We start with Terman, the ability to think in terms of abstract ideas. Wechsler, the aggregate of global capacity of an individual to act purposefully, to think rationally, and to deal effectively with the environment. Superman, ability to discriminate or perceive differences. Now, the last one is operational approach, or this is also known as experimental approach or laboratorical approach. What is this? This is, now you find, if you just deal with this approach, you will find that the confusion that surrounds the adaptive characteristic of biogenic approach or innateness of intelligence as proposed by the psychogenic approach or psychogenic model, the psychologists have found a way to bring themselves out of this dilemma by presenting an operational model. Here, psychologists specify as to what kinds of operations could be taken as the empirical indicators for the reference of their concepts like intelligence, emotion, feeling, perception, etc. etc. Such specifications are taken as the definitions but not constituting a priori knowledge or be analytically true. For instance, in case of the term intelligence, a priori knowledge suggests a conventional dictionary meaning which states that intelligence comes from the Latin verb intelligence, which means to understand. Here we need to define the term understand. By doing so, we shall reach nowhere because we'll be facing one mentalistic concept after another in a rapid succession. It is here, therefore, that the operationalism operates. The empirical indicators of the existence of a phenomena like intelligence are specified in clear terms to enable scientists to do research on a purported phenomena. In a way, Boring was right when he said intelligence is what intelligence tests measure. What intelligence tests measure are certain conditions or performance tasks which define a property or a characteristic purported to be measured. Examples are those of numerical ability, verbal ability, then spatial ability, musical ability, and so on. To sum up, intelligence is a construct which cannot be directly assessed but inferred from the behavior of an individual. Its adaptive use or innateness is again inferred conclusion. The operational approach would always serve as tool to measure intelligence through well-defined indicators. Now let's talk about the determinants. Two identifiable determinants are one, heredity, the other one, environment. Now we start with heredity. What would be the extent of impact of environmental factors on intelligence would be determined by the heredity. Evidence suggests that genetic variation has a significant impact on IQ. Despite the high heritability of IQ, few genes have been found to have a substantial effect on IQ, suggesting that IQ is the product of interaction between multiple genes. Other biological factors correlating with IQ include a ratio of brain weight to the body weight and the volume, and location of gray matter tissue in the brain. An often quoted study, 1937, shows that identical twins reared apart had IQ correlations of 0.79. In other words, even though these genetically identical individuals had been raised in different environments, they still had fairly similar IQs. A fairly exhaustive review of the literature revealed that IQ correlations, we have a table here, and this is table 1 on IQ correlations. First is unrelated children reared apart, and 4 studies are there, and the correlation has been found as 0.1. Then we have foster parents and their children. Again, there are 3 studies, but their correlation is 0.2. Then siblings reared apart, we have a correlation of 0.47. Then siblings reared together plus 0.55. Then we have identical twins reared apart, the 4 studies in all, and the correlation comes to plus 0.75. Then identical twins reared together, there are 14 studies, and the correlation shows plus 0.87. And then grandparent and grandchildren, there are only 3 studies, and their correlation shows a positive of 0.27. Then parent and child, it is a positive of 0.50. There were 13 studies in all. Then this whole table shows that genetic factors are indeed involved in determining IQ. The closer genetic relationship, higher the repeated IQ correlations. Now, environmental factors. From the table cited above, we find that the identical twins reared together in same environment, their IQs are more similar than those reared apart. Also, when unrelated children are reared together, there is a significant correlation between their IQs, for instance, in the genetic linkage at all. Similar IQs result from the identical environments. Among other factors, impact of nutrition in early childhood has been studied having strong impact on the child's intellectual development. Mental retardation and nutritional deficiencies have been positively related. Some recent studies have shown that inadequate protein intake prevents full development of the brain, especially those areas involved in memory storage. Then another factor is stimulus variety. It is yet another environmental factor impacting intelligence. Hunt has shown that more children see, hear, and touch in early childhood, more they would like to acquire in later childhood. The key to cognitive growth is matching the child's present intellectual ability with just the right amount of stimulus variety to bring out the mutual desire to continue learning. The other crucial environmental ingredient is intellectual development is past experience. In a learning situation, children who learn to master one problem are able to transfer this knowledge to other problems he may encounter later. On the basis of his studies, Bloom 1964 lists 3 environmental factors which are important in developing child's intellectual abilities. These are: 1. The amount of stimulation children receive for verbal development. 2. The amount of affection and reward children receive for verbal reasoning and accomplishments. 3rd, the amount of encouragement children receive for active interaction with problems, exploration of the environment, and learning of new skills. Summing up, there is a lot of evidence available that intelligence is impacted both by nature, that is heredity, and nurture, that is environment. The influence comes as a result of their interaction with reference to specific periods of development. The impact is large in early stages and lesser in the later period, including adulthood and old age. Let us conclude this lecture. To define intelligence in most objective terms is really a difficult task. There seems no agreement among experts, psychologists, and test constructors as to what is to be called intelligence. People believing in the biological evolution of the species consider intelligence an ability helping human beings to survive in the mid and carry the struggle for existence throughout their life on earth. Psychologists take it as an inborn capability to execute the commerce of life in a balanced manner. Both bio and psychological explanations are only a qualitative presentation of some important perceptions. A numerical treatment is also required to assess intelligence of an individual in amount. To achieve this, the exactness of the primary components of intelligence has to be found. The operational approach helps here in working out a measurable definition used to be quantified for the purpose of ascertaining the extent to which a particular individual possesses a certain amount of intelligence in numerical terms, or in other words, to work out an IQ, that is intelligence quotient. For each person who is being tested for intelligence, we can have an IQ estimate. With these words, I conclude today's topic on intelligence. Thank you.